This is the backbone of our modern world, a global supply chain that moves trillions of dollars in goods across continents. It's a system of almost unimaginable complexity, a symphony of logistics that puts nearly any product you can think of within arm's reach. But what if I told you the blueprint for this entire system was drawn up over 2,000 years ago? This wasn't just a road. It was the world's first global supply chain. It was a sprawling 4,000-mile network that, for the first time in human history, connected the great empires of the East and West. It was a network run not by corporations, but by powerful middlemen who got rich on a revolutionary idea, that the greatest fortunes are made by controlling the connections. This is the business story of the Silk Road, and how a deadly pandemic helped bring the first global economy to its knees. To get the sheer genius of the Silk Road, you first have to understand the world it was born into. Picture two separate planets, orbiting the same sun, but with almost zero knowledge of each other. In the West, you had the Roman Empire, a ravenous consumer at the peak of its power. Its wealthy elite had a bottomless appetite for the exotic, for anything that signaled status. They wanted spices for their food, gems for their jewelry, and mysterious medicines. But more than anything, they wanted one specific thing, a fabric so light and so lustrous, it was said to be woven from air itself. In the Far East, another giant was stirring, China's Han Dynasty, a civilization of immense sophistication that held a closely guarded secret. For centuries, they were the only ones who knew how to cultivate the silkworm and weave its threads into the most desirable textile on earth. This wasn't just cloth, it was a national treasure, a state secret. Leaking the methods of sericulture was treason, punishable by death. Between these two worlds, the hungry markets of Rome and the secret workshops of China, lay a vast and terrifying gap. The 4,000-mile expanse of the Silk Road network was home to some of the most inhospitable terrain on the planet. You had the crushing emptiness of the Taklamakan Desert, a name that some say means, you go in but you don't come out. You had the jagged, freezing peaks of the Pamir Mountains, the roof of the world. These weren't just obstacles, they were the tyranny of distance made real. And the problem wasn't just physical, it was a problem of information and trust. How could a Roman merchant do business with a Chinese silk producer he would never meet? Who would risk the bandits, the sandstorms, and the constantly shifting politics of the kingdoms in between? Who would finance a journey like that, knowing the chances of a caravan just disappearing were astronomically high? For a long time, the distance was absolute. The demand in the West was a silent ache. The supply in the East was a locked vault. The world was disconnected. To bridge this gap, you didn't just need courage. You needed a system. Empires and armies don't build supply chains. Entrepreneurs do. The solution to the impossible distance between China and Rome didn't come from an emperor. It came from the sheer ingenuity of the people living right in the middle of that impossible distance. They were the original venture capitalists, the logisticians of the ancient world. They were the middlemen. The Parthian Empire, centered in modern-day Iran, found itself in a position of incredible leverage. Geographically, they were the gatekeepers. Land routes from the east had to pass through their territory, and they quickly realized they were sitting on a gold mine. By controlling these choke points, they could tax and profit from the lucrative silk trade, becoming a vital bridge between the East and the Mediterranean. But the true masters who turned the Silk Road from a series of disjointed paths into a flowing network were the Sogdians. Hailing from the region of modern-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, the Sogdians weren't empire builders in the traditional sense. They built an empire of trade routes. Their city-states, like the legendary Samarkand and Bukhara, became glittering hubs of this new global network. The Sogdians' masterstroke was perfecting the relay system. They understood a simple truth. Almost no one would ever travel the entire 4,000-mile length of the Silk Road. The risks too high, the journey too long. So, they broke it down into a series of manageable legs. A merchant might buy goods in a Chinese oasis town, haul them a few hundred miles to the next city, sell them to another merchant for a profit, and head home. That next merchant would do the same, carrying the goods further west. This wasn't just a simple chain of handoffs, it was a sophisticated business model that distributed risk and maximized profit. With each transaction, the goods got marked up. Silk that left China for one price would be worth exponentially more by the time it reached the Mediterranean. The middlemen, especially the Sogdians who managed this system, captured the lion's share of that value. They were the brokers and dealmakers who understood the flow of goods, the shifting prices, and the art of the deal in a dozen languages. In fact, the Sogdian language became the lingua franca of the Silk Road, the English of its day. For centuries, to many in China, the word for merchant was basically synonymous with Sogdian. They were the ones who truly unlocked the potential of the Silk Road, transforming a trickle of goods into a torrent of commerce. They didn't just move silk, they moved ideas, technologies, and religions, acting as the primary cultural conduits between East and West. They were the human engine of history's first global supply chain, driven by the oldest motivator of all, profit. To call the Silk Road a road is to completely misunderstand it. It was never a single paved highway. It was a living, shifting web of paths, oases, and cities. And running this network required a mastery of business principles that are surprisingly familiar today. It was a system built on advanced logistics, clever risk management, and revolutionary financial tools. Logistics, the fulfillment centers of the desert. The heart of Silk Road logistics was the caravan, and the engine of the caravan was the Bactrian camel. These two humped marvels were the container ships of the ancient world. A single camel could carry up to 500 pounds and go for days without water. The economics of camel transport demanded a specific strategy: high-value, low-weight goods. It just wasn't profitable to haul bulky things like grain across a continent. The entire business model was built on luxury. The cargo had to be worth far more than the cost of its transport, and nothing fit that description better than silk. Lightweight, durable, and in sky-high demand, silk was the perfect product. Alongside it came other compact luxuries: spices from India, gemstones, potent medicines, and perfumes. The journey was made possible by one of the most important innovations of the era: the caravanserai. These weren't just roadside inns, they were the ancient world's version of Amazon fulfillment centers. Placed about a day's journey apart, these fortified compounds were the essential nodes in the supply chain. Inside their thick walls, caravans found safety from bandits, stables for their animals, and secure warehouses for their cargo. Here, goods were unloaded, sorted, traded, and repackaged. A merchant from Persia could sell his glasswares and buy spices just in from the east, all within the caravanserai's walls. They were the physical infrastructure that made the whole relay system work. Risk management. The price of passage. The Silk Road was soaked in risk. The potential for profit was huge, but so was the potential for total loss. The most obvious threat was bandits. Long stretches of the route were lawless, and a slow-moving caravan was a juicy target. So merchants treated security as a calculable business expense. They routinely hired armed guards, and the cost was simply baked into the final price of the goods. An ancient form of an insurance premium. Political instability was another constant threat. A new king, a sudden war, or a new toll could shut down a route for months. But again, the relay system proved to be a brilliant form of risk mitigation. A disruption in one region didn't stop the whole flow. Goods might be stockpiled in a caravanserai until a route reopened, or merchants would quickly find detours, creating new paths in the web of trade. This made the network incredibly resilient. Finally, there was the terrain itself. Brutal deserts and treacherous mountains were constant enemies. Managing this came down to knowledge. Experienced caravan leaders were masters of geography and weather. They knew where every well was. They knew the exact window to cross a mountain pass before the winter snows made it impossible. This specialized knowledge was a competitive advantage that separated the successful from those who perished in the sands. Financial systems. The invisible ledger. As the centuries passed and the network matured, perhaps the most revolutionary innovation of all appeared. It solved the problem of moving value without physically moving bulky, heavy coins. The solution, which emerged in China during the Tang Dynasty, was a form of paper draft known as feiqian, or flying money. The concept was transformative. A merchant in the Chinese capital could deposit his heavy metal coins with a trusted agent or office. In return, he got a paper certificate, a bill of exchange, recording the value. This piece of paper was light, easy to hide, and worthless to a bandit. Hundreds of miles away, the merchant could present this certificate to a corresponding agent and get his cash, minus a small commission. It was a system built on a vast network of trust, an invisible ledger connecting the economies of distant cities. While not initially a currency, its convenience was so great that merchants began trading the certificates directly, laying the groundwork for paper money and modern banking. With the logistics, risks, and finances figured out, the Silk Road entered its golden age. For several centuries, especially under the stability of huge empires like China's Tang dynasty and later the unified Mongol Empire, the network boomed. The trickle of luxuries became a flood, and the wealth it generated was mind-boggling. Oasis cities along the route transformed into cosmopolitan metropolises. Samarkand and Bukhara, the heart of the Sogdian trading empire, became legendary. Their markets were a sensory explosion where you could see Chinese merchants in silk robes haggling with Persian traders and hear dozens of languages, all bound by the common tongue of Sogdian. This was when the network's full impact became clear. Silk went from a Chinese state secret to the ultimate status symbol in Rome and Byzantium, sometimes literally worth its weight in gold. In return, gold, silver, and wool flowed east. India sent spices and textiles, while Central Asia sent war horses and jade. But the most profound exchange wasn't physical. The Silk Road became the main channel for ideas, beliefs, and technologies. Buddhism, born in India, traveled east with merchants and missionaries, forever changing China's cultural landscape. Christianity also traveled east, while Islamic science and philosophy flowed along the network, preserving Greek knowledge that would later fuel the Renaissance. Chinese inventions like paper, gunpowder, and the magnetic compass made their slow but steady journey west. This was Globalization 1.0, an era where different civilizations were woven together for the first time. The traders and caravan leaders weren't just moving cargo, they were cross-pollinating civilizations. The Silk Road, at its peak, was the nervous system of the ancient world. But its very success was about to unleash a catastrophe. Every system has a vulnerability. For the Silk Road, the very thing that made it so powerful, its intricate connectivity, was also its fatal flaw. For centuries, it was a conduit for wealth. But in the mid-14th century, it became a superhighway for something far more sinister. The network that connected the world was about to unleash the Black Death. The plague is believed to have originated in the plains of Central Asia, the very heart of the trade routes. For years, the bacterium Yersinia pestis existed there in rodent populations. But as those animals died off, their fleas found new hosts, the pack animals and people of the Silk Road caravans. The disease hitched a ride, traveling in the fur of black rats and in the bloodstreams of traders. The plague began its march along the trade network. The relay system, so efficient at moving silk, proved just as efficient at moving death. A trader would get infected, carry it to the next caravanserai, and pass it on. The results were apocalyptic. The plague reached the trading port of Kaffa in the Crimea in 1346. From there, Genoese trading ships, the maritime extension of the Silk Road, carried it to the heart of Europe. The impact was a systemic crash. The pandemic killed an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population. It didn't just kill customers, it killed the supply chain itself. It killed the merchants, cameliers, guards, and farmers. The intricate web of production and transport just disintegrated. The economic consequences were profound. The flow of goods slowed to a trickle. But the plague wasn't the only shock to the system. The Mongol Empire, which had secured the routes, began to fracture, and the Mongol peace that had guaranteed safe passage was over. Then, with the rise of new powers and the eventual fall of Constantinople in 1453, the old overland routes became increasingly difficult and expensive for Europeans to access. The great land-based supply chain was mortally wounded. Survivors were left in a fractured, poorer, and more fearful world. Cut off from the luxuries of the East, a traumatized Europe began to desperately look for another way, a search that would lead them not across the land, but onto the open ocean. The story of the Silk Road is a timeless lesson in business and innovation. It shows us the forces shaping our world: globalization, supply chain disruptions, the search for new markets, aren't new at all. They're echoes of a story that started over 2 millennia ago. If you enjoy untangling the business behind history, consider subscribing to see where we go next. The crash of the Silk Road created a void. That void forced a radical pivot: the Age of Discovery. The voyages of Columbus and Vasco da Gama were, at their heart, business ventures to bypass the old, broken land routes and find a direct sea path to the east. The world's economic center of gravity shifted from the deserts of Central Asia to the oceans of the globe. Yet, the ghost of the Silk Road lives on. Its basic model, a relay system breaking a massive journey into smaller parts, is the same principle that powers the internet, where data packets are relayed from node to node. Its hub-and-spoke logistics are the blueprint for modern shipping and air freight. And today, the story has come full circle. China, the ancient starting point, has invoked the spirit of the Silk Road with its monumental Belt and Road Initiative, a multi-trillion-dollar project to build a new network of ports, railways, and highways, retracing the ancient paths with modern tech. The Silk Road teaches us that connectivity is one of the most powerful forces in history. It can generate incredible wealth and weave cultures together. But it also shows how an interconnected world is vulnerable to systemic shocks, whether it's a medieval plague or a modern pandemic. The world's first global supply chain may have turned to dust, but it left behind a blueprint that we're still following today.